well.
Paddy and Eleri. According to your website, you met in a dark room.
It's true. It's true.
You did meet in a dark room.
Yeah, we might have been outside the dark room, but
Yes, that's
we
true.
met as students many years ago, when we studied on a BTEC national diploma. I think they still exist.
Just
probably over 20 years ago, in Yale College in Wrexham, and that's where we met. We haven't been together all of that time. We've drifted apart and come back together again. Not just lives went in different directions.
Yes, and now you're together in this lovely shop you have in Llanrwst.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Tilt and Shift.
It's almost come about by accident, but now we're here. We're working quite hard to make sure that that it actually works. We moved up to Llanrwst a few years ago into a very small cottage, and suddenly realised that actually we didn't really have much space for making work. So you'd have your beans on toast on the table, and you'd have some darkroom chemicals on the table, and you'd be thinking, this can't be healthy. This can't be good. We need to find somewhere to work. So the search began to find just a little studio space, really, initially. And as it happened, we knew people who owned this building, which was vacant at the time, and said that, perhaps if you'd like to use it, we could, come to some arrangement. And we came over to have a look at it, and of course, the deciding factor was the fact that it had got a cellar, and so we'd got an instant dark room. So we took it on really as a workshop, as just a space. But because it's a shop in the centre of town, we suddenly found ourselves with a shop front. So we opened up the front as a bit of a gallery for ourselves initially to show our own work. But things were progressing, and now we're starting to open it up to other photographers to use too.
So as an educational resource then, or just for amateur photographers, or people, do you teach them, or?
We're not running workshops at the moment, although we get asked frequently if that's something that would be interested in doing. People come in and say, do you do workshops? And of course, at the moment we're saying, no, we don't. Partly because the darkroom facilities are not quite up to scratch in terms of health and safety. We have to be very conscious about having other people in the building with water, electricity. Accidents can happen. We haven't got the money to get sued, so, but we're looking into we're getting a builder in very shortly to have a look at sort of shoring it up to make it something that other people can use as well.
Do you work exclusively on film, Paddy?
No. When I was teaching, when I first started teaching, I used to teach alternative processes. So although we both use film, we still use digital as well. I ended up teaching digital technologies as well when digital was sort of first coming in. So yes, we use a combination of anything really. I think my background is kind of more having taught in an art and design faculty has become more sort of fine art practice. So we're prepared to sort of give anything a go, from platinum palladium printing, cyanotypes, anthotypes, trying working with different media and materials, so putting cyanotype onto copper leaf, onto gesso panels, anything really.
Wow, that's quite exciting, actually.
It is. It's nice to, after being in education, being now sort of giving yourself the permission to start playing that you wanted your students to do, and they were somehow usually quite reluctant to do, and now I've got the space. We've got the lovely Tilt and Shift kind of venue. Wish I had a bit more money to buy a few more chemicals and paper and things, and had a bit more time. But yeah, it's slowly. And I've always been a very sort of slow worker. I have to hold my hand on that. Lel is a much more prolific photographer, and a better one as well, I have to say. But I've always been very slow. I think I overthink things.
Does it work as a photographer printer type?
We have our own practice, and then as Tilt and Shift, we work together, I'd say really, really well, because we both have different strengths. So I tend to do the working with people. I will do the sort of meeting, greeting, making them feel comfortable, while Lel's behind the camera.
That makes me sound like an ogre.
Well, no, but that's how it works. I mean, some of the projects that we've done together, like the assembly project I Cynulliad, which was photographing the 60 Welsh Assembly members. Yeah. I couldn't be on every shoot, but I would, when I was there, be working with them. Lel's photographing.
Yeah. How did you find that? Because I've had recent experiences with politicians, and I find them an intriguing breed to photograph. I find them a little egocentric, some of them. How did you find them when you worked with them on the project?
Well, we photographed all 60, so there was a very broad spectrum to start with. Some were incredibly obliging and really embraced the project, and found out as much as they possibly could. And when they'd had their photographs taken, they were keen to let their sort of colleagues know and to encourage them to participate as well. There were others who were not necessarily reluctant, but maybe hadn't been briefed quite as well. You can imagine that trying to deal with 60 assembly members, you're also dealing with 60 teams of staff, and within that team of staff there was also multiple people. So, sometimes even getting to see the assembly member took many phone calls and emails, and sometimes it would be with one person and then that person had left and it would be with another person. So depending on how they were briefed would depend on how they responded to me as a photographer. So there were occasions where I turned up and they didn't really know what it was about. They just said, I'm having my photograph taken, but they didn't understand the concept of what we call the assembly project. But as it gathered momentum, and we were very lucky to have sort of support at the top. So at the time, David Ellis-Thomas, who was then the presiding officer, and Rosemary Butler, who has since become the presiding officer, were both really supportive of the project, and chivied people along, and really kind of, really helped us to make it happen. But I don't know whether it took sort of 2.5 years to complete, which is
sure, yes.
which we were crawling by the end. Yes. It was like running a marathon, and
yes.
we were sort of on our hands and knees.
Did you have a lot of time constraints laid on you by?
Well, we were both working full time as well, so days off, days were booked as holidays to go and do this. So that was hard. And if there were any opportunities, while Paddy was on a break from college, we'd go and do stuff together, and if not, I'd go and do it on my own. But you were very good at rallying the sort of organising finances and being more managerial.
Well, we managed to get some sponsorship through Yale College, which was where I was teaching at the time. So managed to get some extra sort of time off to do the project, and some funding which helped, for paper and just general expenses. So again, without that, it would have been even more difficult.
Have you published it as a book?
No. We've exhibited it twice. It's been exhibited at Theatre Clwyd in the community gallery there. It's also we had a lovely exhibition at the Pierhead building.
Yes,
which was attended by the assembly members, and we also not only had the photographs which were framed and in the gallery space upstairs in the Pierhead, but we also projected the images onto quite large. I think they were a bit unnerved by it, weren't they? Yeah. We did quite large projections of the images on a rotating sort of slideshow, and that went really well.
To be honest, I'm not sure, outside of the 60 assembly members, whether there would be that much call for 60 photographs of politicians.
I don't know, because the setting must have been intriguing, and deciding on a setting. Were they helpful in that respect, or did they just? Because I can guess some of them didn't really.
I mean, that was part of the project. Was they as part of the brief, they were asked to choose somewhere that was either politically, socially, culturally, or personally, meant something to them. Yeah. And this was, as Lel was saying, was with some people, they'd kind of not been briefed, or they hadn't quite understood it, and some had genuinely thought, right, I know where we're going. This is where we're going. Get in the car. And
what sort of reaction did you get from them when they saw the work?
I think they were. I think to start with, they weren't entirely sure whether we'd ever finish. I think there was a general sort of consensus that I'm not entirely sure whether they weren't taking bets actually,
Probably.
as to whether we would get this project sorted. And I think they really, really enjoyed looking at the photographs of the other assembly members. I think it was more. I think on the evening of the exhibition, I remember there was quite a buzz, and it was, somebody was saying, "Oh, look at that one over there. Have you seen so and so?" And so it was received very well by the assembly members, and it was also received, very well by lots of other people who said, "Wow, what an interesting project!" And can't believe.
Yeah, I think there were particular people who really clearly enjoyed their image. Rosemary Butler, particularly, for example, she liked it. So we had requests for, can I have a copy of my image, but certainly not everyone, as I suppose with most people. A lot of people don't like to be photographed.
I had a similar idea, but not to do with assembly members. But I'll throw it in your direction. You might be interested in doing it, because I think I've gone off the idea a little. I wanted to do all the lords who live in Wales.
Oh, right.
Now that might be a really interesting project to do, because nobody knows really who they are except Lord Kinnock and people like that. But that would be a cracking project to do, And because you have the track record, would it be something that would interest you?
I don't know. Do you know what I've actually thought might be even more intriguing? Not necessarily lords, but sort of the Welsh aristocracy, because I'm not entirely sure there is one. I think, wouldn't it be interesting to research and kind of wheedle those people out?
Well, I've met one or two. There's, I do the Dinevo Literary Festival, and I do the kind of official work for them. And I met Lord Dinevo. He's heavily into cars and things like that, and there must be some interesting people around.
But not as many as maybe down Westminster.
We could do the Lords project, but obviously we would require sponsorship. If you're willing to sponsor it, that would be great. Well, fantastic. We'll spend another 2 years driving over Wales again.
But it would be really fascinating to go around and photograph these doddery men, you know, because they're probably all old and stuff, you know.
Are you including the ladies in this?
Well, yeah, I suppose I am. Lords and ladies of Wales.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or dames.
Yeah, and dames.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting. I'd love to meet them.
No,
that's the thing, you see. Now then, right, okay, here we go. I'll throw something in your direction. When I increasingly, as I grow older, I'm finding that everything I photograph becomes a self-portrait in a weird way, and I'm not sure. And even things like landscape and things, they kind of become my self-portrait. Have you ever thought?
No, that's just you. I think you do project yourself within your photographs to a certain extent. I think the way that you see things and you imagine how a photograph's going to look, but you can imagine how a photograph's going to look, and then when you get there, that you can never.
And the reason I say that is because I find it increased. My father is 94 years of age, and I want to photograph my father, but I'm finding it increasingly hard to photograph my father. I've photographed him, but I've never really photographed my father, and I think one of the reasons behind that is not because I don't have a relationship with him. I do. We get on very well. But I think it's too close to me, and that's the self-portrait thingy that's really freaking me out a little.
Well, strangely, I've actually recently photographed my mum and dad together, and my dad was one of 3 brothers and my mum is one of 3 sisters, and I photographed the 3 sisters together, but unfortunately I said I'm going to photograph my Auntie Dot and Auntie Jan and mum together, and then I'll photograph Dad and Uncle Tony, and then unfortunately before I got to do that, Uncle Tony died. So I think you have to act on these things, and if you're thinking about it, you need to do it. Just do it. Because before you know it, the opportunity will be missed.
I know. It's a really weird one. And I've had this conversation with another photographer who will be appearing on our site. And I asked him, and he said he found great difficulty in photographing his father. And in actual fact, he had only one image of his father that he'd taken.
Yeah.
And it's a strange one, isn't it? Because the relationship with people and the way you behave with your sitters is crucial.
Yeah.
How do you approach it?
Ooh. What, specifically with family or?
No, with anybody, really.
I don't know. I think you've got to try and identify with them. I think you've got to empathise and have a. It's. I suppose it's like meeting anybody. There's some people that you'll spark off straight away, and there are other people who you find slightly awkward to talk to, and conversation is difficult. And I don't know whether I actually even have a sort of method as such. I think you just have to. You have to go out and see what happens, and maybe that sort of reflects in the photographs. Maybe, images work for that reason, or images work because of that. I don't know. Yeah,
it's a really difficult one because I find because I enjoy the company of people. I enjoy chatting to people and talking about things in general. And people's reticence about being photographed. How do you overcome that problem of people saying, "Oh, I know," because people are a bit like that.
They can be, yeah. I think it depends on what sort of environment you're in and what kind of projects. I mean, if you're very specifically going out to do a portrait, then there's an understanding that is going to happen. I have been in a situation before where I've agreed to photograph somebody. And when I got there, they were very, very awkward, even though they consented to have their photograph taken. When I got there, I don't want to be photographed like that. I don't want to be photographed in this room, which then made it and I was wanting to say, well, if you just lean forward slightly, because if you lean forward slightly, then your face will be in this beautiful pool of light that's coming in through the window. I don't want to do that. And it's like, well, bang goes that photograph then, and there was a real reluctance with that person I couldn't really understand, and I unfortunately I just had to let that one go. Sort of.
Yes.
But very, very rarely do I come across people. I think if you approach somebody to take their photograph, then there's a contract there that sort of says, okay, I'll let you see me. Yes. I think also just directing people slightly. People don't always like to be directed, but I do say to them, look, I'm the photographer, and I promise you this will work. Yeah. If you do this for me, you'll get a much better picture. Yeah.
I tend to I have a couple of theories, but I tend to now. I will actually, because, and it's working with a camera up here as well, different to working with a camera down here. Working with the camera down there, you have eye contact with people, which makes a huge difference. But I tend to now, when I'm doing digital and doing it quite quickly, I will wait and wait and wait and not say anything, and they almost don't know what's going to happen. And that waiting period, actually, they end up sort of relaxing in a way.
Yeah.
And I was photographing a poet. He's no longer with us, Gerard Lloyd Owen, and he was an awkward, and from a photographic point of view, he didn't really want to be photographed. But I know he gave me one photograph out of a whole series, and that's a joyful thing when that happens. Documentary work.
Yes.
You studied in Newport.
I did.
How was Newport?
Oh, magic. I don't know, there is something magic about Newport. I don't know whether it's still the same. I think it's changed, unfortunately, as far as I'm aware. I did go down there recently to the Cullinan campus, and of course it's in a huge upheaval at the moment, so I can't vouch for the course now. But when I was there, and it's had the most enormous history of teaching photography. And some of the photographers or some of the students that I was in college with have gone on to do amazing things. And I was lucky enough to be part of the 100 Years of Newport exhibition. I had a little bit of work selected, and it's such a feat, really. And it saddens me that it's changing to the point where it almost doesn't really exist anymore, that the campus is moving and the teaching staff are migrating, I think, because of all the changes that have gone on. The sort of politics of education people have drifted away, or they've taken a step. They said, "I don't want to be here anymore," taken a step back. So, hopefully, you know, they'll sort themselves out. But as a student there, I mean, I couldn't have hoped for a better education in terms of photography. I think I wouldn't say it's taught me everything I know, but it's helped me find a direction and find a voice in terms of photography, and that applies not only just to documentary work but to everything else I do. You know, I still to this day kind of hear people like Clive Landon saying, why are you taking that, and why have you cut his feet off? And you know, you can still hear the dialogue that you had with those tutors in your head, and you still reassure yourself that you've made the right picture, or you should take that one out of the edit, and it's all still up there.
So are you working digitally now?
Yeah. I mean, I still shoot film as and when I can, but processing is expensive, and we're very lucky up here that we have a great camera shop called Cambrian Photography in Colwyn Bay, which is a mecca to many photographers, because it's an independent shop which is still open and still thriving, as far as I'm aware. But digital is just part of what people expect these days, and it does make it. It kind of makes it cheaper. It's something you kind of assume it makes it cheaper. It doesn't when you think of how much equipment you've got to buy, and then you've got to buy equipment for post-production as well. People kind of don't always see that, don't see the side of the post-production that the Photoshop or Lightroom or whatever that you still have to subscribe to. But I shoot digital just because I've worked with magazines, and that's what they expect. It's just easier, cheaper.
Yeah. Touching on education, you were involved in education, and you were telling me earlier you left 4 years ago.
Yeah, about 4. Yeah.
How did you find the teaching of? Because you taught old processes really, and how did you find that students sort of embraced that sort of technology, that old technology?
It's an interesting one. There was certainly in my last couple of years, there was almost a complete desertion. Students really did not want to engage with a darkroom, with a process that they saw as completely out of date. So the facilities that we had 2 black and white darkrooms. We had a colour darkroom with 5.4 enlargers, 35mm, 120, deep tanks. A fantastic facility, and by that point I was involved in the courses which were teaching photography, but I wasn't actually directly teaching film processing or darkroom work. Other colleagues were doing that, but essentially after a sort of 6-week introduction, you barely saw a student in the darkroom, because they wanted to be on the suite of shiny Macs. They can photograph on their mobile phones. They can they've got digital cameras. It's quick. It's immediate gratification. Not many 17-year-olds want to spend half an hour in a pitch black room developing a film, coming out smelling of chemicals. And that was really tragic. You would get an occasional student who would embrace it perhaps a little bit longer, but invariably. Shows at the end had very, very little analogue work. Yeah, and that was a great shame for me.
Yeah. What do you think they were missing out on?
The sheer joy of seeing an image come out in a tray. There's still nothing like it. To go into a darkroom and print a negative that you've made. It's a hands-on, and it's interesting because I've listened to the interviews on the Ffoton Wales website, and this is one of the things, going back to my education, it's about making and taking photographs, and that subtle difference, because most people say, oh, I've taken this photograph, and they don't really think about it. And I was taught by John Blakemore, and I can remember him saying that, okay, did you, that it kind of implies that these images are just sort of floating out there, and you just reach up and you just magically take it from this bank of visual kind of world, a visual world out there, and you actually make images, whether it's digital, because okay, do you make it on your phone? Do you make it on a 5 megapixel camera, a 20 megapixel camera? What paper do you print it on? You know, this is a whole range of decisions that you are making, either pre-production, post-production. So for me, I always try to be careful and always say make an image rather than take an image, and that's what for me the students missed out, that slightly longer process. And also, film is dearer. So it's 36 pictures. You've got 36 pictures, not 3,000 that students want. And so they motor wide. You know, most cameras these days 5 frames per second, and students would rattle through and have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs of not very much. Whereas slowing it down with film and thinking, okay, each frame is costing me this much to print or process, I'll be a little bit more careful. So all that whole thinking process, I think, was denigrated with the advent of digital. But again, you could still teach. It's not to say that digital is entirely to blame for that, because there are teachers involved. If you can teach it differently, then there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to encourage that making kind of aspect of it. But it was that craft element. I think that's what was began to be missed, because from making negatives, then you can go on to make other forms of photographs using other techniques. And again, where I was teaching, the facilities were second to none. I mean, absolutely superb. The whole printmaking department. But again, without that, it's just digital. Put it on a Mac, send it to print, and you've got a print.
You must have quite a huge archive of material.
Yeah, none of it's any good.
I don't believe you.
You can have an archive, but well, I mean, as we were saying at the very beginning of the interview, that we both met in a darkroom over 20 years ago, and I've been photographing ever since, and not as a professional photographer. I actually one of the reasons when we finished our BTEC National Diploma and Paddy went off to study at Derby, and I actually went to drama college because I wanted to be an actress.
Yes, well, I follow the same course as you. Well, in a weird way. Yes.
Yeah, but isn't that straight? And I in my head, that's what I was going to do. I was going to go off and be an actress. So I moved to London, and I was lucky enough to get into a college called the Webber Douglas Academy, and studied there for 3 years. But throughout that time I was still taking photographs, and I had a darkroom in the cellar of the house where I was living. So there's an archive, going back that far. I mean, to some people I hear stories of people who took up photography when they were age 7 because they used their grandfather's books. But I actually came to it quite late. I think I didn't start really thinking about photographs or photography until I was in my very late teens, early 20s, and I went to America to work as an au pair when I left school. And it so happened the lady that the children I was looking after, their mother was a friend of a photographer who was working for the National Geographic magazine, a chap called Bruce Dale. And we went to see Bruce. We met him in Washington, went to the National Geographic headquarters, and I was just immediately smitten. I want to be a photographer now. That's what I'm going to do when I get back. But of course I'd got this other career that I wanted to follow as well. So after sort of 10 years of faffing around in the theatre, I thought, well, that's no good. I'm not making any money here. I'll go and be a photographer. And of course, I've.
What was your first job as a photographer?
As a professional photographer, sort of excluding sort of weddings and bits that you do as a student to try and make a bit of money. I actually managed to find a job working as a staff photographer. I was called chief photographer, but I was in fact the only photographer. And it was for it was a lifestyle magazine called Concept for Living, which was essentially an interior design magazine. So it was such a departure from anything that I learnt at Newport. but it was a job working as a photographer, and I was getting paid for it. So naturally, I sort of bit their hands off when they offered me the job. And I did that for 2.5 years, and I've got an archive of magazines that, every month 3 or 4 houses would be featured that I'd photographed, and a few shoots that I'd done, and portraits that I'd had to go off and make. So it was a kind of baptism of fire in terms, and also at that point I hadn't really, I'd been at Newport shooting film, and then suddenly it's like, here you go, here's your digital camera. Go off and make some pictures. So it was a very steep learning curve.
A lot of lighting involved.
And
how did you cope with all that?
Well, I think that was the one thing I think you do learn at Newport, is that you learn to be very resourceful. Make it look like you know what you're doing, and people might actually believe you. But I learnt on the job. I literally learnt on the job. If I went back and thought, oh God, those photographs are awful, you could tweak them in Photoshop a bit, but I got much better at lighting, in situ, so that so I can still, I still go out and do photo shoots every now and again for national magazines, interior design, that sort of thing, and currently work for an antiques dealer doing photography for his website, just product shots, but it's crucial to his business, and it's a good bread and butter sort of job for me, because I get regular work from it.
Yeah, and it's local.
Yeah, and it's local. It's great.
And you're quite close to the conurbations of Manchester and Liverpool here.
Yes, yeah.
Do you get work in that direction, or?
No, to be honest, if I get work away, it's away. It doesn't matter where it is. It could be Scotland, it could be Somerset. The work takes me where it takes me. I think Manchester and Liverpool have probably got their own scene in terms of photographers, but people come to me either through recommendations or because I've worked for links with TV companies. I've worked for the Discovery Channel doing stills photography. So the work will take me where it takes me, and that's where I go.
Cool. Paddy, what sort of photography do you get up to?
Well, I'm not as prolific as Lel, so my archive is nowhere near as large as Lel. So I don't get quite as much opportunity, and I've always, as I said, I've always been quite a slow producer of work. So my stuff really is kind of landscape in a very I'm trying to think of.
I think you'll find yours is well thought out.
It's well thought out. It's but there's very few projects. So mainly landscape, but I'm doing
quality, not
quantity.
Yeah,
Thank you. That's it. Yeah. But I'm going more into still life kind of stuff now, because that's easier for me, so I can commit to my day job. But then in evenings, and as the light is now sort of coming through, right, I can work from here in the studio.
You have something in common with a great Welsh photographer called Chalky Davis. He started as an aerospace engineer, and you started as an aerospace engineer.
I did, yes, indeed. So I was trained at British Aerospace in Broughton as an aeronautical engineer, and I did 7 years, and just went into the office one day and looked down the office, and as you got more senior, you moved back towards away from the manager at the front. And I can remember it was all of the guys all had white shirts on and ties, and I just walked down the office and I thought, I don't want to end my days like this. So I made an appointment to go to the local college, Yale College, and photography for some reason seemed to be the only thing I could do. I couldn't draw, but I knew I wanted to do something kind of arty. So I had a portfolio of photographs that included pictures of my pet rabbit. I remember it was really poor, but I was a mature student.
Never told me that.
So they snatched my hand off. So I quit my job at Aerospace and embarked on the 2-year national diploma in audiovisual studies.
That's the one.
In
1988.
1988.
Yeah, 100 million years ago.
Yes, 100 million years ago. Yeah. So.
100 million years ago.
Yeah.
That's a long time ago. That makes me about sort of dinosaur
it just
age.
feels like it.
Yeah,
It just feels like
it. A kind of thing that strikes me about photography. It's kind of a very lonely existence, being a photographer.
I love it.
Why is that then?
I don't know. I'm quite I'm a slightly reclusive sort of person anyway. I think that's why we live in the middle of nowhere in North Wales. We're not exactly in the middle of nowhere. Llanrwst is a thriving hub in terms of it's a great little town. It's very independent, but I certainly love. I've grown up in the countryside, and I don't feel comfortable in cities. I can cope with cities for a short time, but I actually enjoy the sort of slightly reclusive nature of being a photographer.
Yeah, it does.
I like being my own boss, quite frankly. I don't like working for anyone else.
Yeah.
I'd rather be my own. I'd rather call the shots myself.
I think I think working, because I became in charge of a multimedia course and media, and it was horrible having to work with groups of people to make a film. I found was horrible. Relying on other people. I'm a bit of a control freak, so are you doing that properly? Are you doing that properly? And so photography, it's very much internalised, and you're in control. And if you make a mistake, it's your mistake. It's not somebody else's that you're relying
But you
upon.
also have the ability to make things happen as well. You're in charge of your own project, and then if you want that to happen, then you've got yourself. You're the one who has to motivate yourself. When you're working independently, if it's a commission, then obviously it's different. But in terms of coming up with ideas and seeing if you can actually pull it off.
Do you for your lifestyle
Yeah.
stuff, do you work with an art director then, or are you working independently?
No, invariably I'm working independently as well. So even I've become quite good at styling. Kind of putting products together, and it's just another. But it's a sort of slight a bit of a string to the bow. But I've learnt to do that. But I've done it out of necessity. But I often find that then comes back into play with other projects that I do. That you start to look at things a lot more analytically. Yes.
So attention to detail must be important to you then.
Yeah.
How finicky do you get?
Not very. It depends on the brief. I think if it requires pernicketiness, then that's what you shall have. But I'm also quite an organic photographer as well. I sort of like to respond to situations as they happen. So there's a big difference between shooting a documentary piece and scrabbling around in the undergrowth wearing a bee suit. You can't afford to be too, not that you can't afford to be, but you can't be too pernickety then. But if I'm in an environment where I'm in a studio and I've got to photograph a product and make it look good so that it will sell, then I have to put. It's like being you have to Wurzel Gummidge. You have to put a different head on.
Yeah. Are you working on any particular projects at the moment? Personally,
I've always got about 100 projects on the go in my head.
Okay.
There's a project that I want to revisit quite desperately, but it's always about time and finance. And that's a project that I started to well, we've both worked on this project together, but I started it a few years ago, and it's photographing the horse fair in Appleby in Westmoreland in Cumbria. And I love animals, and I've always wanted to go to Appleby and see the horses, and each year I go, I do a little bit more research on this project, and the first year I went, I had visions of coming back with a documentary piece, and it was absolutely the last thing that I came back with. I suddenly realised that if you go to Appleby at the first week of June, I think it happens every year, that you're probably more likely to see more photographers than you are to see horses and travellers. So the following year I went back with a slightly different. I thought, right, okay, I'm going to have to outwit all these other photographers and think of a different way of doing it. So I made a huge backdrop. And you came with me, Paddy, we did this together, and we made a backdrop, and almost as soon as we put it up, of course we realised it was never going to be big enough.
But it was
big.
It was 30 plus feet wide.
My plan really had been to photograph the
18 foot
horses with their riders, So the thinking on your feet at the time, we thought, okay, we can't do the horses and the riders. We'll do some portraits, and we made some really, really interesting portraits. Taking people out of context, I think, and I think they've worked very well. And I'd like to go back and revisit that.
Are they in colour then?
Yes, they're colour, and they were shot digitally, and they were shot. If you look at the portraits, you might even imagine that they were not taken in a studio, but you would never have even the remotest idea of the chaos that was going on around us at the time.
There are thousands and thousands of people literally within 5 feet.
And
so we've got this backdrop in the middle of
gypsies kicking off and horses kicking off.
Did you light that as well?
No, we took a portable sort of backdrop with us. I had an on-camera flash and a reflector. And we just did it that way, and we were very reliant on the weather. This is part of the sort of learning process that actually. So this year I'd like to go back, and this year I know that perhaps we'll think to take a bigger backdrop.
You've got a bigger backdrop.
We'll take some sort of canopy so that if the weather changes slightly, then there's more consistency with the light. So it's an ongoing. I think this is a project that will go for years.
What was the backdrop? Was it?
I actually sort of sewed a few pieces of large sort of pieces of hessian together. So
it didn't really matter if it got dirty either.
Oh no, there was there were hoof prints on it. There was mud, you name it. It was on it, and it kind of added really to the
very textured, of course.
Yeah. And even things like the things that I've learned since coming back and looking at those images. It's even things like using slightly different depths of fields, inconsistencies in the portraits because. Maybe I shot it on one aperture at one day, and then the next day we had a cart, because when you go to Appleby, because there's so many horses and people there, that they actually close the street. So in order for us to get to where we needed to be, we had a hand cart that we dragged around with us with all our equipment. And so depending on where we decided to set up that day.
So in a way you were a documentary in yourself. Somebody should have photographed you.
We did film.
People thought we were nutters, didn't they?
Well, but again, going back to one of the other questions that you had about this, for me, was about working together, and that was interesting because you made all of the photographs because you had the camera, and I was engaging with. So I was looking through this crowd of people walking towards us and going, right, okay. Oh, you look quite interesting, and trying to get people to. Oh, what are you doing? Well, we've got this huge backdrop. It's fairly obvious. So trying to spot the right kind of people to make an image of, but there again, sometimes we would get people who insisted on having their image made, and you kind of have to go through the rigmarole of doing it. We were also then sort of making notes and trying to get contact details for people so that we could get consent forms and forward images on and whatever. But again, that's what I think we're very good at together, because again, as you said, with the digital camera and you've got it up to your eye, you don't have that eye contact. But then if there's two of you and we trust each other implicitly, that I would start a conversation with the subject, and then Lel would start making pictures. And then at some point, usually she would sort of not give me a signal exactly, but I knew to withdraw, and she would take over the conversation and start. But they were already sort of comfortable, and it was an interest because that then allowed me to go off and find the next person to look.
But I guess you didn't have a lot of time with these people.
No.
How many? I mean, it's kind of one of those instances minutes, where you go bam, 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 and
sometimes they were. Sometimes they'd like to stand and talk for a while, but it would normally be 10 minutes at the absolute most that you'd have the opportunity to make a portrait. But what was interesting is, despite everything that was going on around, when you look at the portraits, that person is entirely engaged with the camera. And we met somebody recently who looked at the work and just could not believe when they said these were taken where? In a field? In where? and couldn't comprehend that this wasn't, in a quiet corner in a small studio somewhere, that this was happening while there were cavalcades of horses coming through, and suddenly you'd
Police,
have to pick up your
fights.
It's actually something because the town of Pontypridd, near where I live, it's a very interesting round, lots of interesting people.
Yeah.
And it's one of my projects in my head as well. What I want to do is take a black backdrop and just go and do portraits in the street.
Yeah.
Because, again, but it's time, isn't it?
Well, it is time, but one of the things that we've said that we're going to do here in the studio is actually set up a backdrop so that we can encourage the people of Llanrwst to come in and have their photographs taken. And one of the inspirations for this is I don't know whether you know him as a photographer, a chap called Mike Disfarmer, who he's an American photographer in I'm assuming it was in 1930s, 40s, and he was called Mike Disfarmer. He disowned his farming background and went into the town and set up a photographic studio. And I was lucky enough when I was at Newport in the third year, we took a small group of us went out to do an exchange with a college in Italy, in Florence, a place called Studio Marangoni. And so we had a lovely exchange with the students there. And it just so happened that while we were in Florence, there was a Mike Disfarmer exhibition on. And we went to see this work. And it's been in my head ever since that this is what I need to do in Llanrwst, is actually invite people in and take their photographs. And I see people walking down the street every day and think, I'm going to have you, and I'm having you. And you're picking them off in your head all the time. And I think we're about to embark on our first exhibition that we're holding for other photographers. We're curating a very small exhibition. But I think once that comes down, then the next project really will be...
Well, it's now that, because Tilt and Shift has been here for sort of over a year now, local people are kind of used to seeing it, even though they might be slightly suspicious of it, and obviously we're becoming part of the community as well, so we're kind of starting to be recognised, we're starting to build up kind of normal relationships with people, and there are so many characters here, and we've got a sort of hit list of probably 10 or 15 people that will sort of be the first people.
It's interesting because the first guy we interviewed in the first one on Ffoton was Tim Collier, and Tim did he went to the Llanrwst estate near Bala and he photographed there for his final student work, and now he's decided that he's going to go back and spend time back. And this is, you're talking 40 years ago, so people obviously will have changed, and some people have passed away, etc. But interesting that long-term projects like that. Yeah,
there's always something bubbling in the back of my head. There's always something going on, and it invariably the reason it hasn't happened is, it's always time and money, always. Yeah. And even, applying for funding takes time. So,
do you find that a real pain?
Oh yeah, I hate it, and I wouldn't do it if I...
But I guess Paddy is really good at it.
Oh, he's brilliant at it.
No.
But Paddy, this is where this is where your engineer's brain. This is where Paddy's the sort of the brains of the outfit.
Yeah, but he's.
Can I say I'm the beauty, not the brains here?
But again, we've had a meeting with the Welsh Arts Council, and they've kind of more or less said, for that project,
if you build it will
apply, and. I've looked at the paperwork again and again and again, and I keep seeing giant hoops to be jumped through, and thinking, perhaps if we just wait a year and try and save that amount of money, it would be
save us the bother.
It will save us the bother of having to go through that. And they were incredibly supportive. The Arts Council was fantastic, but there's still something at the back of my mind going, there are ties invariably involved with that.
Do you think then that, let's be, not political, but let's think about photography in Wales then? I mean, you were saying, and Newport, some amazing photographers that come out of Newport. Hearn was one of the guys who, some amazing stuff has been made. There are some amazing photographers in Wales. Why are we such a disparate lot?
The nature of photographers. I think we're almost essentially sort of solo kind of people, and it's only well, certainly for me recently, that I've realised that actually it is perhaps more important to be part of a network these days. But it's taken me years to accept or even acknowledge that. I always thought that, you know, to be a photographer meant you go out with a camera, you make your pictures, and then suddenly, I mean, after my degree at university, at the time we were taught no commercial aspects of photography at all. It was fine art photography. And then when we finished this 3 years, literally it was 1 week you're a photographer, next week you're in the great wide world. And I don't know why, but in my head I don't know what I was thinking, but I don't have a job. I'm a photographer, and I've got nothing. I've got no facilities. I've got my camera, but I've got nothing, absolutely nothing. And so you end up working in the civil service for 2 years, and then eventually getting a part-time evening job teaching photography. And also, I didn't want to make images after my degree at university. You very much did, didn't you? Your experience at Newport was completely different, but I felt drained about it. But being part of a network still kind of slightly. I'm still hesitant. Do you know?
But do you not think that there should be perhaps there should be a base in North Wales? There should be. I mean, there is a gallery that shows.
I'd love to see something in North Wales similar to Chapter in Cardiff. I really miss. I mean, I've lived in Cardiff and I've studied in Newport, lived in Cardiff, and that I really, really miss. That even just sitting down with either a pint of something in your hand or a glass of wine and just talking about it, talking about ideas. I think photographers are generally very insular, and they're quite guarded about their work as well. It's a phenomenally competitive market that we're all in at the moment, especially since digital photography is that everybody's a photographer. Everybody's got a camera.
What sort of spin do you put on that? Because the term is a very loose one, isn't it?
Yeah.
When everybody is a photographer. No, everybody is not a photographer.
I think everybody has the right to call themselves a photographer.
Yeah.
And why not? You know, I could just as easily call myself a poet. but when it comes to sort of clients, really, I think if you can show them a portfolio with, I don't know, that has some credibility, I think there's a difference between, you know, saying, well, I'm a professional photographer or I'm just a photographer.
We did used to, again, Mel still does some weddings occasionally, and we used to do them together when I was still teaching. And you would go to wedding fairs, and invariably there would be more photographers than anything else. And then certainly towards the end, there would be a wedding photographer who, you know, the package was £250, and, you know, slightly dodgy and not particularly good, but would still get business, and, you know, because yours is £1,000 or £1,500, you know, and it was literally, well, I've got a camera, I've photographed my friend's wedding, and then all of a sudden they were at a wedding fair being a wedding photographer, and you would kind of look at them, but they would still get people going to the stands and interest.
It's made it very hard to make a living, really. It's for me, you know, I have to take. I can't afford to be choosy, really. I was interviewed recently for my old, because once I'd finished at Newport, I then went on to study. I did a master's degree in Falmouth, and I was interviewed for their college magazine recently, and I think they were a little bit sort of taken aback at the fact that I'd done some wedding photography, and they said, how do you feel about that? And I thought, well, it's a job, it pays my wages.
It also gives you opportunities to make some really, really interesting images. And I think when we look back on some of the stuff that we did, you know, together, and you still do.
But I think
it's fantastic pictures.
If you can photograph a wedding, because you're doing within the space of a day, you're sort of doing still lives, you're doing portraits, you're doing reportage, you name it, you're doing it, and you know you finish doing a wedding and you wake up the next day and you can hardly move because you feel like you've done a workout. Yes. And I think I've actually learned a lot, and I've applied it to other jobs because of that.
Right. The wonderful thing, I've not done many weddings because I've tended to avoid them, but the ones I've done have been very successful. People have really liked the work, but I found that what happened with me was that on wedding days, there's all this kerfuffle and stuff going on, and I'm getting my little zone in my little world, photographing away. But the tendency to change goalposts, because you show them one set of imagery and they're really happy with what you do, and my work is mainly reportage stuff. They're very happy, and then suddenly they want the specific shots, and they want, but they decide on the day, so you're having to think
again
really quickly.
I make people have formal
again
shots.
that's when we've done it together. That's again, this is the beauty of working together with somebody that you trust. Because again, we will work in that way, as Lel says, we always insist that we don't want any formal. You will have some formal pictures, because while we're doing that, you're relaxing. It's also because I will set the groups up and talk to the people. Lel will be making pictures, and pictures of other people watching them making the pictures, and that gives you a structure to it. So even whether the client doesn't want it or not, they're getting them.
They don't know they want
and they thank you afterwards.
Actually, Paddy, you must be the perfect assistant.
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, you are.
I get paid very little.
Yeah. But you understand the medium, and you understand the dynamics of people. You understand the dynamics of organising.
He puts up with my moods.
Yeah.
And
do the driving.
Does the driving.
No, it's a really we are very
most of the time.
you no, absolutely you are. I would get a little bit flustered sometimes with things, but you're very good with just because you make so many images, you make thousands and thousands of images.
And understanding the box as well helps a lot. If you understand the box, I mean, it's kind of 90% of the way there,
it's
isn't it?
practice.
And it's
That's
practice.
all it is. It's just practice.
Yeah.
And if you get out of practice, then you kind of lose your confidence. That's all.
Yeah.
It's like flexing a muscle. You just have to go out and do it every day.
But also, there's the thing about the pleasure of making pictures, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you still have that absolute joy of making pictures on a daily basis. Yeah. I don't make them quite so regularly because I tend to sort of overthink them. But you will make images just because she wants to make the image.
Okay, question. What have you learned from him, and what has he learned from you?
Slow down. Put the brakes on. Stop panicking. I don't know. Well, probably Paddy does think very hard about the photographs that he takes, and then when he makes a photograph, I'm like, why didn't I do that? I should have taken that photograph.
But you recognise my style now, because she will come back and she'll go, here's one for your melancholia project. It's a melancholia shot, and she's made exactly the image that I would have made if I'd been there, but I'm not out there doing it. She's done it. But it's funny that you can pastiche my work now, whereas I can't do yours.
No. I don't know. I think I have learned possibly to. I mean, Paddy's very good at the technical side of things. I'll tend to work my way through every setting on a camera until I've worked it out in my head. I tend to do it by practice. I'm quite dyslexic, so I'll have a go, see what happens. Whereas Paddy will sit down and read the manual, and then when I've given up because I can't work it out, he'll say, "Oh, have you tried this? Oh, that's how it works."
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? It's like if we have a new camera, I'll read the manual. You'll just go out and make pictures, and then go, "I don't know, it doesn't work."
But we did this when we first started, as part of the antidote to digital photography. We both started to look at doing some alternative processes. So we started to play with platinum palladium, which is something I've always wanted to do, but hugely expensive and technically quite difficult. And I was getting very impatient because you were reading, you were looking stuff up online, and in the end I just got the chemicals out and thought, I'll see what happens.
Yeah, that cost a fortune.
Just see what happens.
Just see what happens.
Well, I made some images, and then Paddy came along and went, "All right, if you do it like this, you'll find."
No.
But I will motivate Paddy into doing something, because I just get so impatient in the end that he says, "Oh, all right, come on then, let's do it properly this time." It
was a big manual, to be fair. That was a big manual.
You're gonna hold? Yeah, I guess it would have been really.
Mark Nelson, fantastic. Absolutely recommend it.
Really?
It's absolutely brilliant.
Right,
but you've got to be very methodical, and I'm still going through it. I have to say, but down to humidity of paper, all sorts. So we've got a dehumidifier and a humidifier. It's incredibly,
Yes, because
Great fun.
A friend of mine who's he's only 25. He works in a printers over in Bristol, and he works in Asda and stuff, and takes photographs. And he's converted his parents' house into this amazing place where, but he does, and he made some platinum palladium prints for me, and they are just extraordinary.
Yeah.
They are extraordinary. The depth in them and the tone.
Yeah, it's about getting to that. We're at the we can get an image, but we want to get to that level of where that beautiful depth, that tone.
Yeah.
That's the next phase.
Yeah. I sort of miss being in the dark room, I think, and I know you don't do platinum processes in the dark room, but the method, and I remember when I was in Yale, and I had converted my parents' shed into a dark room and ran an extension lead from their kitchen into. I miss that sort of I miss the time that I had, because obviously you have a lot less responsibilities, but just that playing around and getting good at something and going over it and over it again until you get it right. And
it's still that looking at a blank piece of paper and then all of a sudden seeing that image come out. It is still magical. There's still an alchemy that is just astonishing, and it's just not the same as putting a compact card into a computer and an image comes up. It's just not.
There generally seems to be a bit of a resurgence, I think, at the moment, and people becoming interested in using film again and shooting film. And
yeah, it's nice. I occasionally go out with a medium format, and I do it every year in the Eisteddfod. Don't ask me why, but I went to festival number 6 and did it actually, which was quite interesting. Just put it on the tripod and go out and just set it up and ask somebody if I can, make a portrait of them, and is there all the faff that goes with it and the clunk, and then they say, "Can I see it?" And you say, "No."
No, you can't.
But they're interested. It's time again. That's what that machine gives you, is time, because you have to make it right, because things are back to front and all that sort of stuff. And you have to use a light meter, and so that's all interesting stuff.
Yeah, but there's no reason why, even shooting digitally, that you can't take that time. But it's just that it of itself encourages you not to, but nothing forces you to press the shutter button.
This is very true.
And although I shoot digital, I shoot very few frames.
Yeah.
And there will be definite shifts in alignment or viewpoint, but certainly I don't shoot hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
I've been tempted to cover up the back. I have been tempted, actually, because you find yourself, continually looking at the back. Do you?
I tend not to try and look at the back too much. I think you kind of know. I mean, perhaps it's the work that I do, which is kind of landscape stuff, and it's all fairly. There's not huge amounts of movement usually in what I'm doing, so you can spend time.
Do you get obsessive about weather and where the sun is and stuff like that when you?
No, can't help the position of the sun.
No, would you go out at specific times, or would you?
Dull days. I love dull days. Yeah, right, when it's flat, because you like it to be a bit more lively, don't you? A bit more cheerful.
Yeah, you very definitely photograph. You will see a day and think, right, I'm going out today, and I think, I'm staying in bed with the duvet over my head. No. But strangely enough, I don't know whether we should confess to this. We've been thinking about buying some filters.
Yeah. Filters.
Never used a filter before in my life, and I don't know why, but I've met somebody recently, who's come into the studio, who's a very keen amateur photographer, and she wants to learn, and she's been telling me all about her, and she gave me a lift to the recent the show in Birmingham, the expo, what do you call it, and very kindly offered to give me a lift, so we talked all the way there and talked all the way back, and she was telling me about what she's learnt about photography so far, and the range of filters that she's been using. I thought it would never have occurred to me to use a filter. I don't know why. So I started looking into it, and all of a sudden, I want all the filters that you can get your hands on. I haven't bought any yet, but I've been looking, and I've made a shopping list. And I'd really love to, because we live in such a beautiful part of the world, and it may be to do with, timing, but I understand that, maybe filters would allow me to go out at different times of the day, and so I could still go out in midday. But if I use a stopper,
a big stopper,
a big
10 stops,
I can still make an exposure, and it won't be completely black.
A Lee big stopper.
Yeah. So this is my next. So goodness only knows what.
There's a company actually in South Wales that makes.
Oh really?
Yes, that makes filters, and they make a 13 stopper.
No. Who'd thunk it? Who'd have thunk that?
They're basically the Lee setup, so that you can slide them in. They're resin ones; they're not glass, but they're quite a good company. But filters. The only filters I use, and I've broken two, are polarizer filters, just to get just to take away the reflections and stuff, make blues a bit bluer. But I rarely use filters.
I know.
I rarely use them. Although I must admit that I will use a bit of grad maybe on Photoshop just to tone down things a little.
Yeah, well, I don't think we'll be going for very heavy kind of graduated magenta.
It could be a throwback to saying, let's get this right in the camera so that you don't have to spend hours in Photoshop. Because I can't sit still. I hate sitting at the computer.
Yeah, but you've done a lot of work. You were telling me earlier that you've done a lot of work on raw files when other photographers were sending in.
Yeah.
Tell me a little about that.
Well, I think that comes down to, strangely, when I was at Newport, learning how to do colour printing. And learning and tuning your eye into colour casts, and those hours and hours that you spend in a colour darkroom, waiting for however long, I can't remember now, 8 minutes for a print to come out, and then it comes out and it's magenta. So you go back and you do it again, and you add a bit of something, and then it comes out, now it's too blue this time. So you get very, very good at looking at colours, and so a few years ago I was asked to do colour corrections for a large organisation in Wales, and they basically said, we've got all of our photographers sending us images and they all look different, so what we've decided to do is we're going to ask them to send the raw files in, and we're going to get one person to kind of tweak them, not overly tweak them, but just gently change the colour, maybe take out a bit of dust, and then send them back to us. So we had an ongoing arrangement whereby, and I think it was more to do with the subtlety of, in the darkroom you work much more subtly with colour, but with Photoshop you can crank up you can crank it up one way or the other, and change the colours and change the saturation.
It's almost too easy.
To the point where it's unrecognisable as a photograph. So yeah, but I think that, again, as when we were talking about Paddy's students not really being very interested in the traditional techniques, is I think that's where you really learn your discipline, and then if you can then apply that to digital, then you're starting to be a photographer, a proper photographer.
Yeah, one could spend hours on, and sometimes I do spend hours, on the computer looking at photographs and working them out. And it was I was on a shoot yesterday, and I was doing all these classic cars and things, but it was a bright day. There were lots of reflections going on, cars and trees and stuff, so there was no way I could, but it was then using those reflections in a creative way. And so there was a beautiful Jaguar car, and all it was a strip of chrome down with a lock on it on the front end and the Jaguar logo. And it was a black car, but there were white clouds above, but they made it look mottled and grey, Yeah. So you're playing around with that stuff. And I think that's the joy, really,
Well, it's the
photography,
subtlety of the tonality, isn't it? That's what you get with a silver gelatin print as opposed to a digital print where somebody goes, oh, look at that amazing black and white photograph. And it's like, well, where are the greys? What happened to the mid-tones? Why is the black so black? Maybe they used a filter, you don't know.
But I comes from a generation, you see, where when I was looking back at stuff that was being late 60s, early 70s, and everything was high contrast, black, whites, you look at McCullum stuff, it was really in your face photography, and that's what I used to that's floated my boat, and it, to a certain extent still floats my boat, but is sort of kind of frowned upon. And people go, ooh, that's taking things a bit
horses.
Yeah, hold your horses, and grain, I quite like grain.
I always used to get students, almost every student in the darkroom wanted to make a really black and white print. That's what they wanted. They absolutely wanted that 99% of the time, and used to have this constant argument, right, okay, so that's what you want, right, okay, just show me one that's got a full tonal range first, and then we can make a choice, but at the moment you can't do a print with a full nice tonal range. So until you do that, then we'll have the argument about whether the really dramatic black and white one works or not. And there would be huge amounts of huffing and puffing, but that discipline of being able to produce a full tonal range print and then go outside of it, but have the choice technically, know what you're doing, or even make it really flat. But it's about choice, it's about control,
knowing what the rules are and then breaking them,
and then perhaps breaking them. I expect
musicians have to go through the Les Dawson school of learn how to play.
Thanks for that.
No, not you. But learn how to do it right, and then you can you can be creative.
Yeah. So what's your ultimate dream as far as Tilt and Shift goes?
Well, it's a very tiny space at the moment. Maybe one day we'll move into a bigger premises, and therefore we can facilitate more exhibitions for other photographers. In the meantime, I think it would be nice. What I'm looking forward to is seeing other people's work in here, and putting the news out, trying to get people in, and trying to get people talking about photography, because we tend to get repeat customers, don't we, in here? We're not a shop. We always say we're not a shop, but the people who come in love to come in, and they love to talk about photography.
But unfortunately, they're not customers because they don't buy anything. They just like the ambience.
No,
but again, they're interested in photography. And
occasionally we get somebody who comes in and buys a print, but more often than not, it's the same people who'll come in and have a chat and a cup of coffee, and they'll stay here for about an hour and a half while you're trying to get some work done, and then they'll pootle off again, and the same will happen again next week. So it's almost like if I could build something like Chapter Art Centre in Llanrwst, where there's the facility for people to drop in and drop out and use the facilities and hire the space for their own, and for their own work, and just generally create a bit of a buzz, because photography is just it's had such a huge resurgence within the last 10 years that we need to be riding on the crest of the wave, I think.
Well, and isn't there some weird sort of thing that the more photographs have been taken in the last 10 years than the whole history of photography?
And I bet none of them have actually been printed.
No, that's the other thing, you see. Is that the digital age, it allows, and we can store it and we can look at it on our computers, but how much of it do you print? Do you print a lot of it?
Not as much these days. I think I've learned from experience that that's the one thing that I've never really got to grips with, is printing digital images. I find it very hard, maybe because we can't afford the right equipment, or the printers are always breaking down, or there's you go to make a print and there's the cartridge missing, or you've run out of yellow and you've got to wait for a few days for it to come. So the process of digital printing, although it took a while to actually really master the art of digital photography, which I think is still an ongoing process for me, but it took a while to find the right camera. I went through a few cameras.
What are you shooting on now as a magazine?
A Canon 5D Mark II.
Oh, same.
And we've even thought about upgrading and then rethought it, and we thought, why do we need a Mark III, because the Mark II is fine, and we're going to spend a lot of money on a camera that's got functions that we don't really need.
And the big difference with the Mark II, to make it really sing, was going back to primes. The 50mm f1.2 is just beautiful, isn't it? And the 35mm f1.4, and we're hopefully eventually get the 85.
Yeah. But there's a lot of people out there who want to learn about photography, who want to learn how to do it properly, and I think hopefully, maybe in a few months, we'll be in a position to start offering workshops on maybe on a one-to-one.
The perfect balance again. An educator and a photographer, educator, and a photographer. Amazing combination. I mean, people would be cut off their right arms to come and study under you.
You're missing a trick.
Yeah.
We're missing a trick. Well, people come in and ask us. That's the thing. I think that's what's prompted it.
What's actually holding you back? Because you seem to think, well, we'd like to do that. Maybe it's too personal.
I'm not sure whether Paddy hasn't just had enough of teaching for the time being. You feel a little bit crumpled, don't you, dear?
I think I'm still. I found teaching by the end. I felt fairly battered.
Why was? Can I be so bold as to ask why?
Just a whole raft of reasons, really. But it didn't become I didn't end up. I ended up not teaching photography. I ended up teaching something else, and a whole variety of package of materials under the idea of photography, but weren't key skills and Welsh Baccalaureate. And I think one of the lovely things, and I'm a great believer in it, is talking about ideas. And I'm quite happy to talk about ideas with students and give ideas away and see what they do with them, because there's always a new idea. Whereas a lot of teachers and people kind of go, "Oh, I'm not telling anybody that. I'm holding that one on for me." I always felt that the more creative and the more ideas you came up with, the more you would then generate. And so after sort of 15 years of doing that, I just felt a little bit bruised. And again, teachers are just simply replaced. 15 years with an institution, you're not exactly expecting to be honoured or whatever, but you walk out the door and next week there's a young teacher in place, and you've kind of almost become instantly forgotten, which is fair enough, except when they ask you for the following 2 years to go back and replace the person who's replaced you for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. I'm still a little bit nervous about going back into that education kind of thing, but the difference is it's education on our own terms. Indeed. And that's the thing. The only other thing is because where I work at Gwydir Castle, so I work there for seven months seasonal, so that keeps the sort of wolf from the door. But that kind of takes up my energy for those 7 months. It still gives me 5 months off, which is fantastic, absolutely fantastic. But it's very difficult for me, I think, to wholly engage, which I think is why when we come to doing the workshops, I will be again acting as kind of like assistant, with Lel taking the brunt of the teaching aspect of it. But again, there's part of me that would actually really enjoy having 2 or 3 people and taking them into a darkroom and, I don't know, showing them how to make an anthrotype, which can be done really simply. The joy of cyanotype. I mean, coating a piece of paper, and you don't really need that much equipment, and seeing, that joy of, that beautiful Prussian blue coming out, it would be fantastic, absolutely fantastic. So we've got a wealth of knowledge to share. It's just about finding the time and the right circumstances and the logistics of it.
It takes time to establish it. Well, not even just you imagine, but finding the wording to write a description to put on a website to everything.
And again, there's the couple that Lal drove down to Birmingham. They have a B&B guest guest house just up the road, and they're running workshops, photographic workshops, weekends from their B&B. So it can be done, and Ria is great. She's very organised. So we've started that little network of support. So we'll take some of their ideas.
So Llanrwst could be actually the epicenter of photographic.
Well, I don't know about that.
It could be. It could be, couldn't it?
Well, I see. Towns like Hereford that have tried with the photo festival, and I think they've tried, and it's been tremendously successful. Some years, other years they've really struggled, and I'm not sort of suggesting that we try and adopt the same thing, but I think baby steps. I think some people just little sort of just spoon feeding people.
Yes, I mean they're exactly the same as what we're doing with Ffoton. Really, it's. I mean, we envisaged when we first started thinking about it, we were going to do video and stuff like that, but we didn't need to do that. No. And little galleries work, and they promote people who are sort of unknown a lot. Yeah, and I think that is. I think that's the beauty of what we're doing, and building up relationships with people, because we don't forget these conversations, and they become archival conversations as well.
I'd love to get some high-profile photographers in here, just to create the buzz, and then to say, right, so 1 week we've got so and so, and then the following month we've just got Joe Bloggs from down the road, or Di Lloyd, or whoever, or just giving them the opportunity to. But it's more about creating a just having the conversation, really, and
a vibrant photographic community.
Or just. Just arts generally. I'm a great supporter. I find that there's a slight kind of, why are artists and photographers classed slightly differently? I adore looking at ceramics. I adore looking at painting, but you never quite get the same back from. I know lots of other artists who just don't get photography, and yet I'm more than happy to go and support other artists and appreciate what they're doing. And yet, when it comes back to photography, there seems to be a slight reticence. I don't know why that is. Maybe because it's just too easy for some people. It's just too easy.
Well, they think it's too easy.
They think it's
but that's why I keep going back to it. You make a photograph, you don't take it. I think that's what people think. Oh, you just press the button. That's all you do. It absolutely is not. It is not. It's a whole. Up here. Here, from the heart. It's a process. It's it's not just that 1/25 of a second. I suppose it's easy for somebody to take a photograph of their pot and put it on their website, but for me to go out and throw a pot, I don't know. I really don't know why there's that sometimes photographers are not. They're looked down upon a little, perhaps. They are, yeah, and that's what makes me slightly reluctant when people ask me about wedding photography. They see it as they're kind of looking down their nose at you slightly, it's just a job. But if I keep saying it, if we could curate a really nice show from some of the wedding photographs made, and although they are made at a wedding, if you take them out of that context, they become socially really quite interesting.
Well, I don't know about you, but when I do, I've only done 4 weddings ever. But I got obsessed with hats and shoes and things. All detail really became important to me. The people, but the detail became really important. And I decided in one wedding, because there weren't that many people there, that I would do. There were only about 30 in the wedding, so I did a portrait of everybody. I just think if Martin Parr went out and made a new body of work at weddings, everybody would go, "Oh, it's fantastic, isn't it? Isn't it brilliant?" But Martin Parr's But similarly, I take great comfort when I know that Ken Grant, who was one of my tutors at Newport, actually did weddings when he was a young photographer in Liverpool, and similarly was going out, using his camera and trying to make a living, trying to make photography work for him.
And he went and photographed weddings, I know, because I've seen the photographs.
Yeah, it is.
And they've actually become, you know, some of those images have become part of a larger body of work that, you know, he's very proud of, and rightly so. You know, you're recording. I think historically as well, you know, they have significance.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
these images are important.
Yes. Yeah, but the social history aspect of photography is vital, really.
Yeah.
About storing. I mean, I'm going to be geeky now.
Oh, don't ask me about storing images. I lose them all the time.
I guess Paddy does all that work.
I've got about 100 hard drives,
No,
and I don't know what's on which one.
Do you know
I
what,
never
when
know
you were
about
saying about a huge archive, and you talk about this quite often, Lel, as we've said, doesn't read the instruction book. So for her, the image, looking at the images, so it's put the card in, look at the images, great, and save them. So there's none of that process of, okay, I'll rename the folder, I'll put the metadata in.
I have a method.
But Lel has your own. Well,
I have
you
a method.
do.
It just might not conform to industry standard. That's all.
Yeah.
I know exactly where
But we do have a lot of hard drives, and we do have a lot of plugging in and unplugging, trying to find certain images. And what she does like is the Newport archive, which is stacks
folders
and
of
stacks
negatives.
of negatives.
I get the negative.
Get the
I don't
negatives,
get the
and because you always say, don't you? The aesthetic of the contact sheet,
well,
which Falmouth didn't get, because Lel did her MA in fine art photography at Falmouth.
Yeah.
I was
and
teased.
they didn't.
I was
They
almost
didn't
bullied
get
it.
contact sheets.
They didn't get contact sheets.
No. Well, I remember sitting with in the first year with my tutor at the time, who was Clive Landon, and we looked at one of our first projects that was Person at Work. Anybody who's been to Newport will have done this project in the first year, and you know, it's about engaging with somebody. It's about, and he looked at this, you know, the first contact sheet I took in, and he looked at it and he went, "Would you like a butterfly? You're all over the place." He said, "Stay with the person, stay with them. You know, you kind of taken a photograph here and then you've moved on to somebody else and you've gone over there." And it's like, well, I can see that you weren't concentrating. I know that you were nervous, or you were this or you were that. And he assessed all of this from looking at my contact sheet. So of course the next time you go in and you absorb this information, you go in and you kind of looks at your contact sheet and he goes, "Right, okay, now we're getting somewhere." And you can kind of see those moments where you're building up to the photograph, that sort of, you know, the decisive moment, or you know, the frame that you're going to use, and then it kind of peters out and then you go on to the next thing. So there was a lot to be learned from just looking at contact sheets, and there was a lot, I think the tutors learned a lot about the students from looking at their contact sheets. And then I went to Falmouth, and I think on the first day we were asked to introduce ourselves, and I said, "Oh, I'm Eleri, and I previously studied at Newport," and somebody scoffed and said, "Oh, isn't that where they do that silly thing with the contact sheets?" I thought, oh gosh, we're not going to get on. We did, however, but you know, there was there was this I don't know, the sort of myth of the contact sheets at Newport had reached a...
Yeah, from an education point of view, you could always tell a student who was naturally really good from one contact sheet. You could see it within a contact sheet. You could say, actually, you've got an eye, and you could see that. And then others, you just go, okay, it might take you a bit longer, and you could see progress. You could track development. But the contact sheet was a fantastic way of assessing students, and also just as a beautiful aesthetic object in and of itself.
Yeah.
You know, just they could be fantastic. You know, absolutely beautiful.
Well, it's almost like the first port of call, isn't it, for making it,
I
editing
always
your work.
think of William Klein's giant, you know, the strips from the contact.
Yeah.
So
The
red,
one from
fantastic.
Magnum book about, you know, which is a contact book.
And how, you know, it's great to see how
they-
the mindset of the photographer or the person who's editing, you know, why have they chosen that image? Why is that picture better than that one? And that's where you develop your editing skills as well. You know, because you've only got a story to put together, and you've got 100 pictures, but you can only use 5. Then you need to learn how to edit so that you get, you know, the 5 best photographs, and there's no repetition.
And again, students would frequently miss a better image. They would completely, you know, just ignore something that was potentially fantastic. You know,
and you can apply that. You can still apply that to digital, but you know, like you say, the people who've shot who's taken up photography prior to learning how to shoot film perhaps won't appreciate.
Well, yeah, if you load a card up and it's got 1,000 images on, and you're looking at 1,000 images on a computer, as opposed to, perhaps developing 2 films and you've got 72, 35 mil, or 3 rolls of 120 at a time, it's a much bigger ask.
I must admit that when I started doing digital stuff, because my career is kind of weird, but anyway, when I started doing digital, I used to fill cards with material, and but now when I shoot now, I go out now, I rarely fill a 16 gig card. That's maybe I've got 40, 45, 50 images. And I know I've got some in the bag. Yeah. You kind of know instinct in your bones. Yeah,
I think you do, absolutely. You kind of you do instinctively know when you've made the right image, which actually means that you don't have to look at the back of the camera, because I think you actually know up here there's something that tells you that you've
nailed it.
That's it. I've got it. I want in the olden days it would have been I can't wait to go home and dev that film. I would dev. Oh, actually, I'm not going to shoot the last 6 frames because I want to see what those pictures look like.
Well, when I was my first camera was a Zenit E.
Oh, fantastic!
With a Helios lens on it, and I bought a 135 lens, and I used to shoot trannies, and
be careful what you say now. Take it the wrong way. That sounds a bit fruity.
Actually, I'll tell you a little story afterwards. But
you can edit that out.
No, it's perfectly happy. There was
trannies won't be.
Yeah, and I used to have to send them off, of course, to Kodak, and the little yellow box would arrive, and it was a great event. The yellow box, and I used to my parents used to spend a lot of money. I used to beg and borrow to buy film, etc. But that was, and the joy of that was fantastic. I went to, you see, in my era, I wanted to go to learn to be a photographer when I was 18. But I didn't, because in my era, you either went to university or you went to teacher training college if you hadn't got the grades. Yeah. I ended up going to teacher training college and doing drama and Welsh, as you did in those days in college. But I discovered that they had a suite of darkrooms that nobody used. Nobody used. I was the only person, and I used to spend all night. I'd have long sessions and experimenting with different sort of film, litho film and all that sort of gubbins, wasting money, on stuff and printing and learning how to print and doing it self-taught. And so I made a lot of mistakes. But I was looking through some negatives the other day that I shot in the early 70s, I used to just go out and shoot bands and things. And it's great. It's fantastic, but because the negs are fine. Yeah. No scratch on them.
No. And but that's how you cut your teeth, isn't it? You go out and you just photograph everything, and you learn by looking. You kind of go, I've overexposed that. Well, that's a terrible photograph. I need to get in closer.
Yeah. And the metering on the Zenit was the
it was a selenium cell on the front.
That's right. And you had to get
you had a little ring on the top that used to, but it had a selenium cell on the front and a little ring that you used to, and it used to have a B, an X setting, and it used to have up to 500th of a second. Right. It was my first camera.
I think I had a Zenit as well.
Zenit, because they were just.
I think your parents buy you one and think they won't want to be seen dead with that, and then they'll give up, and then I won't have to buy any more cameras.
Zenit,
I still beg and borrow money for film. And
great, and I sold mine for like, I don't know, 10 quid or something. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And I wish I kept it. I really wish I'd kept it. And my ambition was always to own a Pentax. Right, but I bought one about 6 months ago. I bought a K1000.
Oh.
And it's not been used.
No, really.
And I got a case for it, and I've got to start putting film through it. I think.
Yeah, you do. I've got a Canon what have I got? Nikon. Sorry.
FM.
Oh gosh, I've gone from one to the other.
I thinking of mine.
No, I had. Well, this is the thing. I always used to shoot on Nikon, and then when it came to digital photography, I started off on Nikon, and then the leap between the sort of
megapixels.
Just the price. If you wanted to do the high-end professional stuff, the leap between that was just. So we sold all of the Nikon kit, but I have still got a Nikon FM2 camera,
nice.
and I just need to get the seals fixed for it to start working again. But it's just, and you forget the size. It's like holding a little bird now. The size of these digital cameras, and then you pick up an old-fashioned Nikon, and you think, crikey, it was tiny, with a nice 50mm f1.8 lens.
Yeah.
And I shot nearly all of my first year work at Newport on that.
Right.
Nearly all of it.
Did you do street stuff?
Well, not really. No, I didn't actively go out to shoot street stuff. I probably had to shoot street stuff as a student at Newport. You were sort of pretty much made to, but that's not my natural inclination to do that. Although having said that, when I think some of my earlier photographs I made I was much more fearless when I was younger, and I would just go and ask people if I could take their photograph. I wasn't trying to be surreptitious at all. I would go and ask people if I could take a picture. And I used to shoot, and I still got it at a Rolleiflex, and the difference between a waist level viewfinder and that you could have engaged in conversation and make photographs.
The camera isn't there, is it?
Yeah, you sort of forget it's there.
Well, these days it's more a talking point for you, isn't it?
Yeah,
as well?
I guess I never get any work done now because people just stop. Can you go away, please? I'm trying to be creative here, and they just want to reminisce about.
I used to have one of those.
Oh god, here we go. Oh, and then you can just see the light disappearing as the conversation goes on and on.
You were telling me earlier that you're going to have an exhibition here. Who are the photographers?
Oh, right. Okay, so we've got three. Well, this is quite an unusual exhibition because not the first photographer, but the person who approached us to start with is actually an artist called Robert Pitwell, who we met when he came into the shop one day, and we got chatting. We probably chatted for an hour. And then just as he was about to leave, we said, "Oh, sorry, we don't know your name. What's your name?" And he said, "Robert Pitwell." And it just so happened that Paddy had been up to, there's a beautiful gallery called Finner Park that sell artwork up the road, and we'd bought one of his paintings. And prints. It's print. It's print.
He's a printmaker.
His artwork. And we thought, gosh, so we immediately had a rapport because we liked his artwork, and he came in and was immediately engaged. And he'd started as although he was a printmaker, he's been using his mobile phone to take photographs, and he's a keen gardener, and he grows tulips, and he's been photographing tulips, the tulips that he'd grown last year. He's been photographing those in a still life sort of setting. And then it occurred to us that while we were looking at Robert's work, and he was saying, "Oh, I'd love to have an exhibition here," that an old friend of Paddy's, who you studied at Derby,
Dave Noble,
who's
who's the
say a bit more about Dave.
Well, he's the course leader at Staffordshire University now, and again he found, obviously being involved in education and running various courses, he doesn't have the time to go out and make the pictures that he used to, so. He's got a very old scanner, and he's just been making pictures using his scanner, but again with using plant material. And I went down to see an exhibition of his in where was it? Leek, was it? Staffordshire.
Yeah.
No, but Leek somewhere. I can't remember where. And because of the nature of these older scanners, they had this depth then that they could sort of scan to. They're much shallower these days, and so although it was this outdated old technology, the images that he made are just exquisite. They're just absolutely beautiful. But again, plants and kind of thing. So we've got his scanographs or scanograms, or whatever you want to call them. And then the third photographer is Torrell Brancher. So
we've got two photographers who are working sort of with botanical themes. So we thought, Robert has made some photographs, but he hasn't got enough to fill the space. So then we started thinking about.
So we got Dave Noble.
So we thought, we could put these two people together and have an exhibition. And suddenly my brain started ticking over, and I thought, well, I remember a lady who was also a student at Newport, but she was studying for her MA when I was a BA student, a lady called Tarl Brancher, and she has been also working with plant material, so another botanical theme. And suddenly when we started to think about these photographers, and then it just sort of came together in a very organic way. And
they're sort of photographing in a slightly different way, because again she uses a scanner, so we've got very low res mobile phone kind of things.
But just through sort of networking, I think, just through having a network of people that we know, and then applying a little bit of brain power.
Curatorial skill.
Yeah. It hasn't happened by accident at all, has it? No. And then so suddenly it was like, well, actually that work would look really nice with that, and we got 3 images of these people and put them together and went, that's an exhibition. That's an exhibition. So I contacted Toril and said, how do you feel about exhibiting with these guys? And she was absolutely delighted. So it's, baby steps, but we'll start with a small exhibition.
Are you going to be exhibiting at all?
No. I don't know. That's a tricky question. It's funny because I tend to. Well, I can exhibit one. Well, I suppose we've got work in the front all the time. But
yes.
What I don't do, what I might do actually, one of the projects I shot last year. I went to Cameroon and did a photographic project about women beekeepers, and I was lucky enough to receive funding from the Royal Photographic Society Joan Wakelin bursary, and it was a project that was a conversation that happened with a friend from the Conway Beekeepers Association, and he'd been out volunteering in Cameroon, and he told me about this organisation, and I thought, I've got to go there. So I put a proposal together, submitted it to the Royal Photographic Society, thankfully managed to get the bursary and went out, and we've got our fingers crossed that the lady I went to stay with, or she was my contact out there, we're trying very hard to get her back over here, so that she has been into the UK before, but we wanted to come back and learn a little bit more about beekeeping in this country. So what I'm hoping to do is when she gets here, we're sort of in the process of applying for a visa, or she's struggling a bit with a visa application, but hopefully eventually we'll get there. And when she comes, then I'd like to exhibit the photographs that I took while I was in Cameroon.
Lovely.
So that she can see them over here too. But it's all about timing. If Mariana makes it over, then that will happen.
We'll tie it in.
Yeah, we'll tie it in with that. And then who knows, maybe that. Yeah, I don't know. So I always feel like it's a vanity project to exhibit your own work. But we've got we've got our sort of experimental work, our sort of platinum prints and anthrotypes and cyanotypes in the front, and it's
very beautiful they are too.
It's very kind of you to say.
Yeah,
so, thank you.
I love the death mask one. I really do.
Yeah, well that's. But I'm lucky in as much as I work for an antiques dealer, and often he gets really unusual pieces in, and they came from a prison in Cornwall.
Really?
Yeah, they were actually found in an antique shop, but the dealer had actually bought them, or had actually been into the prison when they were closing it down, and apparently there were hundreds of them, and they were just smashing them. They were going into the skip, and he managed to salvage a few of them. But they're death masks that I can't off the top of my head remember the name of the maker, but they were made by somebody who specialised in making death masks.
Yeah.
And they're quite gruesome, but they're quite beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, I was telling Paddy earlier, Bruce Reynolds' son, the great train robber, his son is the only licensed person in Britain to make death masks. How bizarre is that?
I know, they're very
and I found one in Jacob's Market in Cardiff.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a Dutch guy, and he's got a very eclectic sort of. He's kind of. I assume he'd be very similar to the guy you work for.
Yeah.
Astonishing material he has in his shop, and he had a death mask, and that was I photographed that. That was.
Well, sometimes I have seen them since. I work for an antiques dealer called Drew Pritchard, who some people may have heard of because he has a TV programme made about him. And I do a couple of days a week, very often just photographing stock for his website. But one of the benefits is that very often we come across things that, that do make for a good black and white print, but those death masks particularly they're very intriguing characters, and you could read a lot into their faces. Whereas some I've seen since, and I think, oh, they're just creepy. I don't like them, but there's something about that particular set, and you could almost imagine what they went down for, what they were hung for. Because you can see the ligature, you can see the sort of the marks on the neck from where they were hung. They're quite horrid. I don't know why I've got them hanging on the wall. I couldn't have them at home, they'd give me nightmares. That's probably why we don't get anybody coming in. Just take them down. You put a picture of.
We do get people coming in saying, "Do you do framing?"
If we had a, I tell you what,
if we had a framing facility, we'd be rich.
Right. We'd be able
all
to
the
eat
time.
this.
Really?
Yeah, we get that. It's we can spot them sort of going past, and it'll be somebody with a carrier bag, and they come in and they go,
right, okay.
"Do you do framing?"
And often it's a tapestry that they've done.
No, we don't. But there's a place in the town square that does.
Yeah.